Alright, so I just watched the Ken Ham and Bill Nye debate live on YouTube, and boy, I've got to say that was a long debate. The thing was nearly 3 hours. I think it went over just over 2 hours and 40 minutes. It was very, very good. I think that it was very informative, very enjoyable. I think that both men were extremely respectful of the other, which is very encouraging to see. Now, I'm not going to lie, I do like to see debates where people get nasty with one another, but I think that Ken Ham, as always, he's very much a gentleman, so you know, I would expect no less of him, and to be polite. However, I think that Bill Nye was extremely pleasant during the debate. I think that there's a lot of things about creation that Bill Nye just misunderstands. I don't think he really understands the creation model very well, because a lot of the questions he was asking were very, very basic questions. However, I think he's, you know, an extremely intelligent guy, and I think he's I think he was showing quite a bit of openness in the debate. I mean, you can just kind of see it in people's body languages. You can see it in their eyes. That they're open, that they're actually hearing what the other guy is having to say instead of just dismissing it. And I think that's a good thing. I think that we should all pray for Bill Nye to become saved. It would be interesting if 5-10 years down the road, Bill Nye is advocating to have his own creation museum built. You never know; it could happen. But I wanted to just comment a little bit on a few of the things that were said. I don't really want to. I don't think it would be right for me to just get in there and debate the speakers. Because the debate was already long, and you know, I think that if people want to watch the debate, they're going to go watch the debate. They're not going to watch me. But there were a lot of questions that were asked back and forth that unfortunately the speakers really didn't get a chance to respond to as much as I think they could. During the Q&A, for example, closer towards the end, towards the Q&A, Ken Ham was asked by Bill Nye, you know, what predictions does the creation model really make? And it's interesting because I've talked about this before, and I'll actually post an article in the description box. There's actually quite a few predictions that have been made using creation models that involve a young Earth and a global flood. Now, as Ken Ham pointed out, if you're starting from the biblical perspective, if we're starting from the scriptural view, starting from the historical narrative that the Bible presents, because in Hebrew, Genesis is presented as historical narrative. Hebrews had one way that they wrote their poetry, they had a different way that they wrote their history. So there's really, if you really know the Hebrew and you're really looking at the context of the Hebrew, there's not really a lot of debate that's valid about whether or not something's meant to be poetry or whether something's meant to be history, because they had a different format for how they wrote each. But anyway, if you start from the history of the Bible very clearly teaches there is a global flood, so you can't really say that it doesn't, even though some people try to claim the Bible teaches a local flood. Bible clearly teaches a local flood. If we're taking the Bible at face value, it clearly teaches 6 days. If you know the Hebrew, the word yom in this context is used to mean an ordinary day, and I've talked about that a little bit in previous videos, and I have actually a video from Answers in Genesis that's one of the very first videos I uploaded to my YouTube channel on this topic. And apparently Hebrew experts are very widely in agreement that if you just started with Genesis and were just looking at the Hebrew text, that the days would mean an ordinary day. But anyway, Ken Ham was asked about predictions a lot, and he really didn't go into it as much as I would have hoped. He talked about it a little bit. He talked about how the vast majority of dating methods don't line up with the billions of years numbers that secular scientists want to give, which is 12 to 15 billion years for the age of the universe. I think it's 13 billion and change is, I think, the average number, but I've seen a little bit of a range. The Earth is supposed to be about 4.6 billion years old. We can just say 4 to 5 billion 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 to 5 billi But he pointed out that the vast majority of dating methods contradict these numbers. We have all kinds of dating, we have hundreds of dating methods, and the vast majority of them indicate that basically the Earth and the universe are young. They're consistent with a young Earth and young universe, but they're inconsistent with an old Earth and an old universe. Unfortunately, he was only able to just briefly touch on this. I would have loved to have more of a Q&A time between the two speakers. Unfortunately, they didn't get to go into this. Anyway, with predictions, there's actually an article on the Answers in Genesis website that lists about 11 predictions that creation scientists have made using creation models. And it turns out that their predictions were actually a lot more accurate than the secular scientists' predictions. And of course there's more than 11 out there. I've talked about junk DNA before in these videos, how in the past people have thought that the majority of our DNA was just junk, useless, leftover from evolution, and said there's no way that an intelligent, rational God would put that there. However, in the past decade or so, it's been proven that this idea of junk DNA is really wrong. There might be a few regions here or there where the genes have been destroyed and they no longer function, but the vast majority of our DNA does serve a function, which is what we would expect from the creation model. So unfortunately, I really wish he had gone more into the predictions, but I think there was some time crunches even in this almost 3-hour debate, which is unfortunate. But one thing that Bill Nye said I thought was interesting was he talked about Louis Pasteur, and he talked about how, well, if you scientists love it when you come up with a new way of thinking and a new way of looking at the evidence that fits a lot better with the old way of thinking. Scientists embrace that. They'll embrace you with open arms. Now, as those of you who've watched my YouTube videos know, I'm a biotech major. And in science, I'll say we have the ideology of being open-minded and really hearing out the evidence. Unfortunately, I think in the public, I think there's two stereotypes of scientists. One is that we're open-minded, and I'm training to become a scientist right now. Right now, I'm working towards my bachelor's. I'm close, and I want to go for my PhD afterwards. But within the scientific community, we do have the ideology of being open-minded. However, with these two stereotypes we have in the public eye, one is that scientists are basically saints, like they're above reproach. It's almost taboo, and even more so within the scientific community, to say something bad about the scientific community. You know, if I've said negative things about scientists who are particular scientists on my YouTube channels before, and I've been attacked for that. I'm like, well, look the guy got his facts wrong. You know, he's not God. You know, like I've pointed out errors in Jerry Coyne's talks, and I'm like, you know, Jerry Coyne's not God. You know, it's okay for me to point out the fact that he's getting his scientific facts wrong. But on the other side of this kind of sainthood, beyond reproach, intellectual stereotype that I think the public has, on the other side, I think there's kind of this closed-minded atheist stereotype, kind of the way that, calling a spade, kind of the way that Richard Dawkins portrays himself, where you kind of have this, well, I'm only going to consider my ideas, I only have my worldview, and I'm not going to consider anything that I disagree with. So there is also, on the other side, kind of the stereotype of closed-mindedness, that if something contradicts naturalism, that sort of thing is just dismissed. Even things like Bigfoot are almost stereotyped as just being dismissed. Anything outside of the ordinary day in and day out is just kind of swept away. So if you have UFOs, if you have God, you have ghosts, you have Bigfoot, stuff stereotyped as being just dismissed. However, my experience has showed me, even though these are the two main stereotypes, what my experience has showed me is that scientists are people. Usually they're very, very smart people, usually. And by and large, I think that most scientists are open to hearing about different things. I think there is a healthy level of skepticism. Like if I were sitting, I've sat and talked with scientists who I work with, and I think at one point werewolves came up. And I think it's just kind of understood. We talk about ghosts and werewolves, we're interested just like everybody else, but there is kind of where's the physical hard evidence. Scientists, I think, are very unlikely to buy into New Age ideas. I think that those are this whole idea of having this fluffy religious belief where it doesn't really say anything, there's really not any evidence, and it's just kind of vaporous spirituality. That's really not so much embraced. However, if we look at things that are outside of the ordinary, I think most scientists that I've talked to seem to have a healthy skepticism, but they're open to hearing different things. And unfortunately, I hate to include creation with things like werewolves and UFOs, because I think creation has really solid evidence to back it up, and not the other things that are kind of weird can't. But I think the creation is in a very different category, because I can go into the laboratory and observe the bacterial flagellum. Unfortunately, I can't go into the laboratory and study ET. Maybe somebody on my campus is doing that, but unfortunately I can't do that. So I think that the claims of creation are very, very different. But I've talked to scientists who are women, for example, and they've told me that their colleagues do sometimes look down on them for being women. I talked to a chemist who's an African American, and he told me that he thinks a lot of times his colleagues do look down on his work because he's an African American. So sometimes you do see prejudice in the scientific community. You do see these things that you would think that you would hope that scientists would be the cream of the crop of humanity, but sometimes there is a close-mindedness, and it's taboo just for me to say that, but it's true. Scientists are human beings just like everybody else. With regards to creation, like I said, I think that a lot of them are very open-minded. My experience is that the Richard Dawkins stereotype is, you have these like Richard Dawkins or Eugenie Scott type people. I find that these angry atheists aren't the norm in the scientific community. Most scientists are actually very open and willing to look at the evidence for creation. Most of them just haven't had the time, or hasn't come up. They grow up, they go to high school, they're trying to do good throughout school, then they go to college and they're trying to do well in college, and they go to their PhD program, and they do well in their PhD program, and then after that, they're doing their postdoc and they're trying to work hard at that. Most scientists aren't angry atheists, they're just very, very busy. That's why I think most scientists haven't taken the time to look into creation. Anyway, I'm going kind of a little off topic here. One other thing that I want to comment on is Bill Nye kept talking about the Bible as written in American English. And I think this is kind of, obviously this was obviously a little bit pejorative. However, I think it's because of a misunderstanding. He keeps talking about, well, the Bible has been translated and translated and translated for 3,000 years, and throughout, and it's kind of like the telephone game. Actually, when it comes to manuscript criticism, the Bible stands above any other historical document in the history of the world. What do I mean by that? Well, we have more documents, more manuscripts of the New Testament than we do of any other historical writing in any other piece of classical literature in the entire world. We have thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament, and the runner-up to the New Testament, a non-biblical, not talking about the Old Testament, the runner-up to what we see is a piece of Greek writing. I think it was Homer's Iliad, but don't quote me on that. And with that one, we have a few hundred manuscripts. So we have an order of magnitude difference between the Bible and the next major historical document. And it's interesting because since we have so many manuscripts of the New Testament, we are able to figure out with a lot greater of a degree of certainty what the original manuscript says. So what that means is we can have more certainty of what the original manuscript for the New Testament looked like than we can of any other piece of literature in antiquity. Ignoring, of course, the Old Testament, because that's would kind of be in its own category. So you can that's pretty interesting. And also, the New Testament was written very soon after the events happened. It was written down by eyewitnesses or people who interviewed eyewitnesses. The four Gospels, for example, 2 of them were written down by the eyewitnesses themselves, or perhaps by their scribe as they dictated. And the other 2 were written by people who interviewed eyewitnesses. Luke, for example, went around and he interviewed people who were present. Luke was a physician, and as a physician he had to be very meticulous, and in this case, he decided to endeavor in a historical venture. And so he wrote both the book of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, the 5th book in the New Testament. And his history originally was very criticized by skeptics, but now it's very highly regarded by even secular historians. So this business of a telephone game, or that we're only looking at American English, is kind of short-sighted, and it shows that he doesn't really know much about theology or much about how these things work. Because people, when people go and they buy a translation of the Bible from the store, it's not something that's been translated 10 jillion times. If I were to go get a New American Standard Bible, for example, today from Walmart, and I take that, I pick that off the shelf, I hold that in my hand, it's been translated recently by experts in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. So when they come out with a new translation, or they update a translation, they go to these original texts and go to these ancient documents and see what do they say. Now, are there variations in the New Testament manuscripts? Yes, there are. Most of them, however, are inconsequential. For example, they might be, using an example in English, you might have it where one document spelled color without a U and the other document spelled color with a U. It doesn't really matter. Also, in Greek, sometimes in the Greek language, the order of the words in a sentence doesn't change the meaning of a sentence. In English, man bites dog is very different from dog bites man. In Greek, however, you can change the words all around and it still retains the same meaning, interestingly. So anyway, this video has gone on kind of long enough, and I got off topic several times, but I think it was worth it to get off topic. Go watch the Ken Ham and Bill Nye debate, see what you think, and remember, don't dismiss a particular, whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist, don't dismiss either view just because the person didn't get a chance to answer, or because they didn't answer. Remember, this is very much a timed debate, and even within 2 hours and 40 minutes, you're talking about where did the world come from. So there's a lot to talk about. I recently took an entire class in evolutionary biology, and I can tell you it took a lot more than 3 hours for the professors to go over the material. So anyway, go watch the debate, check out my YouTube channel, subscribe, comment, rate, send my videos to your friends. Check out my new science search engine, blueslug.com, and remember, slug is spelled with 2 G's. Check out my video, The Creation Challenge. I'm thinking about making a follow-up to that soon. Anyway, thank you for your time. This is Greg, out.